guys can have a seat. So, Brandon asked me to speak the other day, and I was like, okay. So I sat down at my computer and started rambling, and here it goes. I survived the first service. Yeah, just this morning I wanted to just ramble. Sorry. When I was a kid, growing up in the country, little farm boy, I remember summer nights when we would go outside. We didn't really have TV, and just staring at the moon, taking it in. The thing is, sometimes we forget how amazing that view really is. Have you ever stood in like the darkest parts of the night, maybe like out away from the city lights, and just soaked it in? It can really be breathtaking. I think we often take it for granted because it's just a normal part of our world. We see it every day, kind of like, here in San Diego, we drive past the ocean all the time. We forget, like, there's an ocean right there. Those of us that grew up in the Midwest, like, but even now, 5 years later, I just drive past it. But the moon is like that. It's up there, and we forget sometimes just to look up. You think about how dreary the earth would be without the moon. Imagine what our nights would be like, because even when the moon isn't, brilliantly full, even if it's just a sliver, it still gives us a hint of light. It still illuminates us. And on those seasons or nights when there's just full coverage, when it's completely hidden, the darkness is just kind of complete, and we sense that lack of light. The moon is truly a wonderful aspect of our world, but have you ever really just stopped to think about this? And it's one of these things that you know in your head, but we don't always actually process. The moon is a large gray rock. It does not give off light. It doesn't emanate anything. It's just a rock. We only say the moon shines. We say, the moon is shining tonight. We only say it shines because it's actually reflecting light from the sun. When our earth is spun in such a way that the sun is at our backs and our night sky is darkened, the light from the sun is still shooting past the earth and hitting the moon and bouncing back to us, creating this amazing view. It's a reflection. But here's the crazy thing, it's not even a good reflection. We've been to the moon. Some people say we haven't. We have. We've been to the moon. We know what moon rocks are. They are dusty chunks of pavement-colored rock. We're not talking about gray rock. It's estimated that the moon reflects between 3 and 12% of the light that actually hits it. Meaning 90% of the light hitting the moon doesn't even, it's just a little bit's coming off. But that little bit is still reaching us and filling up our night. Which I suppose speaks a little bit to the power of the sun, right? It would take 200,000 to 300,000 full moons to equal the amount of light that's just coming from the sun in the middle of the day. And that should also tell us something, though, about the moon. As I was sitting there thinking about this, the truth that we all know, and in our head it's there, but we don't really sometimes process it when staring at such a beautiful view, is that the moon is not a big, beautiful, glowing, magical light ball like we thought when we were children. Rather, the moon is a lifeless, pockmarked, pavement gray rock floating alone through space. Aw. I mean, it is, right? It's just it's a rock. If you in your backyard just picked up a rock, until the light from the sun hits it and reflects down to us and fills our atmosphere with a vibrant glow. And isn't it amazing that so much light and life could come from a pile of gray, dusty rock? How could something so incredibly vibrant actually owe all of its brilliance and life to something else? You take away the sun, what is the moon? It's a rock. And here's the thing I wanted to talk about with this is, do you know what else is a pile of lifeless, dull, gray dust? You. Pete's on a roll today. So happy. Me, us. See, the story of our existence, there's two stories of our existence, really. One story is a story that says there is no purpose. We're just all a cosmic accident floating through space, and what we happen to be is what evolution brought about. Deal with it, right? Take it or leave it. That's not my story. It's not the story I believe. The story I believe is in a loving, brilliant creator who designed this, who planned this. And here's what that story tells us about how he designed it. It says that God took the same materials as the moon. The same dust that covers the face of the moon covered the face of the earth. And he reached into this dust of the earth and made this thing called man. That you and I are dust. But in doing so, this is where this really gets crazy, and sometimes, man, let's think this through. Because it's very easy to just say, you're just a pile of dust, you're worthless. But that's not what the story actually tells us, because it gives us much more information. It's not just, you're dust. I think, I know, we're all carbon matter, right? No. When he made you out of dust, it then says, he made you in his image. That you are in the image of your Creator. And this creates a tension for us to think this through. Wait, am I a pile of dust or am I godlike? Which one is it? It's both. How is that possible? What does it even mean to be in the image of God? What are we talking about here? Let me just touch on that for a second, because there's a lot of, sometimes people bounce around different ideas. Let me just start by saying the image of God cannot be anything to do with your physical body, as if God is a biped animal with hands and feet and a digestive system. He's not. He's spirit. We know that. What makes you like God is not what makes you like an animal or tree. We're all dust. Physicality is not what makes us like God. Physicality is what makes us like the moon or any other rock. But God breathed life into us. And what does it mean then to be in the image of God? Some would say what separates us, what makes us God-like, is our ability to reason, to think, to be rational, to make decisions. I think that's pretty powerful. Others would say we have the ability to choose right and wrong. We understand morality. Like you think about an animal doesn't know right and wrong, they just act. But humans have this sense of I should do that or I shouldn't do that, which is very much like God, isn't it? Another aspect of God is personality, personal. Like we have the ability to actually relate to other human beings. We can talk and interact, and we can sense how you're feeling. I have not a lot of empathy, but I have some empathy. My wife has a lot more. We have the ability to feel. We have the ability to show compassion and mercy and kindness and self-sacrifice. We understand there's something about us that understands us, and that's somehow something about God, right? I've even heard some say that what makes us the most like God is when we're creative. I like that one. Something about seeing God in our artistic nature, when we build skyscrapers and bridges or write poetry or beautiful music, when we create the next iPhone that Brandon can make us feel guilty for having in his busyness series. There's something about that resonates God in us. But I would say this, which one of those? I would say, well, all of them. Because I think what it means to be the image bearers of God is that you and I reflect who he is. Like what it means to be in his image means whatever is true of God is somehow true of me. Now, obviously, there are distinctions you have to draw. We're not all-powerful and all-knowing. But when we talk about things like morality, consciousness, personality, love, mercy, there's something about these things that God is reflected in us, right? We were made in his image. It means that somehow we reflect God. Again, not physical, we're still just dust, but somehow this dust takes on the character and nature of God. And so we read things in the scriptures like this. God is love. What a powerful statement, right? Not God loves. We know God loves. No. He is love. God is love. It is his nature. And imagine the implications of that statement. If he is love, what are his image bearers? What are his reflections? Am I most like God when I love? And am I the most unlike God when I don't? Fun questions, right? We say, hold on, but how? How is it that dust can look like God? How does that work? We're just rocks, right? Well, how does the moon shine? Does it have anything in of itself that shines, that glows, that gives life? Or does it shine because the light of the sun is hitting it? And is it possible that if the sun can light up a little lonely rock in space, the source of light and life can bring anything to life? And so when John, speaking of Jesus, makes this comment, he's touching on something we're talking about. He says, in him was life. Jesus, in him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. You could jump ahead a couple slides for me. In him was life. He is the source of it. You think, well, the sun is the source of light. No, all life and light radiate from God. Everything else is a copy. And yes, we're only dust, but just like the moon comes to life when hit with the light from the sun, so we can become brilliant when his life and his light are allowed to reflect off of us. Think of just how amazing this idea really is, that the Creator God would be willing to shine his own light and his own life onto these piles of dust, and suddenly they're beaming with life. And not just life, but his life, and they look like him. Suddenly a pile of dust looks like the God who created the entire universe. We become beautiful, shining beacons of life called humans. He said, I breathed life into this dirt and called it man, Adam, who somehow look like him because he's being reflected off. It's like, how could this reflect God? I'm a poor reflection. So is the moon. But what's shining on it is so bright it can't help but reflect. And in a sense, this, guys, is what, when we say, what does it mean to be human? Again, there's two stories, right? There's the story of like, well, we're all just a cosmic accident floating through space. You are what you are, whatever. Okay, take that story. That story means there's no meaning in nothing. None of this matters. But this story says, this is what a human is. What is a human? Philosophers want to sit, this is what a human is. A pile of dust reflecting its creator. We are then the most human when reflecting the giver of life. You are at your fullest, you're most human when God is radiating off of you. I might go a step further and say you are only human when God is being reflected off you. And we look around us and we see sometimes that people act and behave in ways that just don't seem quite human. For if the light of life is no longer shining and reflecting off of you, what is left? What are you? What are we if not truly human and reflecting his image? What's left? In another one of the amazing books that we hold in this thing called the Bible, one of the authors, a guy named Paul, talks about this issue. He talks about, in his letter he wrote to this church in Rome, he wants to touch on this. And it goes a lot more theological, not as like TED Talkish as I'm at right now, but he kind of goes at it, and he wants to say, like, look, there's two competing stories, right? And one story just says this is all an accident. The cosmos has magically caused life to form. We've evolved into this thing. We're just floating, whatever. Whatever exists is whatever is. And whatever is what it should be, because there's no such thing as what should be. We simply are. Paul says, no. What exists right now is not what should be. What is happening right now to humanity is brokenness. It's not the way that it's supposed to be. And so when you and I watch the news and we hear these stories and we see people abusing and hurting each other and brokenness, and we're like, oh, this story over here says, just deal with it. There's nothing to be done. But this story over here says, actually, that's a sign that something's broken. And if something's broken, it can be fixed. So Paul wants to explain this. He dives in and he says this in chapter 1 of his letter to the Romans. And he talks about this, and he says the word they a lot. But when he says they, he's talking about us. We could just say humanity. We'll just say we. He says this, for although we knew God, we knew there's the light, we neither glorified him and allowed his light to run our lives. We never give thanks to him. But our thinking became futile, and our foolish hearts were darkened. Think about that. When we stop letting God be the source of light, we become darkened. The light is shining on me, literally. And I'm like, nah, I don't want that light. And I step over here, and suddenly I become darkened. And look what he says. Though they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Okay, well, what makes them fools? Here's what makes them fools. They exchanged the glory of God, the light of life, for images, reflections, made to look like mortal human beings, birds, animals, and reptiles. He's talking about idol worship. Like they carve a little idol, worship. He's like, the giver of life is shining on me. I'm like, no, I don't want that. I'm going to make my own little God. Oh, shine on me, piece of wood. What happens when we do that? Humans quickly forget the source of light and life is God, not ourselves. That little piece of wood you just made does not radiate life and love and light. Although they knew they were created to reflect him, we chose instead to step out of the light and try to shine my own light. I don't have any light. I am a rock floating through space. I trade the reflection of God for the reflection of a dead idol. But in rejecting him as the true source of life and light, choosing to seek my own, there are consequences. And so Paul gives this one sentence next. He says this, therefore, God gave them over. So God's like, all right, there you go. To what? The sinful desires of their hearts, sexual impurity, the degrading of their bodies with one another. And he'll go on from here. He'll do a whole list. He'll say, murder, envy, strife, anger, rebellion, jealousy. The whole list of crap that we see in our world started for Paul when we said, here's the light. No, I don't want it. I want my own light. I want to reflect what I want to reflect. Humanity finds itself returning to the formless, decaying gray dust from which we came. Why? Because we thought it was a good idea. We thought we were wise. We were really fools. In doing so, we have become dehumanized. Because I'm only a human when I'm fully reflecting my Creator. When I stand apart from the light into the dark, I lose his image and I lose what it means to be human. I become the lifeless, barren dirt from which I came. We're foolish enough to think that we can shine on our own, and you can't. You're just dust. And like the moon is nothing but a dull, boring rock without the sun, so too are you nothing but corruptible earth without God shining himself on you. And I think the key in Paul's line then is his next statement after this. He says, we exchanged the truth of God for a lie. We gave up the light for nothing. And we worshiped and we served created things rather than the Creator. The moon said, forget you, sun. There's an asteroid right there. Hey, asteroid, shine on me. The asteroid's like, I don't have any light. We have that comet tail. That's just the sun shining off me. Oh, dang it. That's what we've done. We have become dust reflecting dust. What does that look like? Neither has any light to give. And what this all means is that because I'm created to reflect him, to be in his image, I am a mirror, right? What Paul is saying here is that which I choose to worship is what I will reflect. You literally become like what you worship. That which I have set my mind and my attention to, that which I give myself to, that which I honor the most, becomes what this pile of dust reflects to the world around me. You will become like what you worship. And when they said, we're going to worship these little pieces of clay and dust, they lost the light of life. So when God is our object of worship, we can come alive as intended, but when we worship the creation, we become like the creation. And the creation has no life to give. Bland, lifeless dust. The author of Psalm 115 makes a similar observation when he talks about humans who do this. And he says this, he says, those who make them, speaking of idols, right, little worship gods, become like them. Those who make little gods out of wood become like little gods out of wood, dead and lifeless. If you worship false gods, you become a false human being. You're not fully alive the way God created you. You spend your life worshiping yourself, your own broken desires, and watch yourself denigrate deeper into selfishness, arrogance, and brokenness, rather than the glorious, life-giving image of your Creator that you were intended to be in. And the reality is, guys, we talk about stories. We know we're there. We see it. We feel it. We have the pain and the scars. We know the world is broken. We don't understand why people keep hurting each other, why everything's broken, why is all this crap happening? And Paul gives us an answer. Later on in this book of Romans, he'll go on to say, what is the result of all this? Sometimes people wrongly translate his word as the punishment. He doesn't say punishment. He says the wages, meaning you worked for it, and this is what you're getting paid. What is the wages? What is the payment? What do you get in return for this kind of life that walks away from the light? Death. Loss of life. Because that is life. And if I'm going to walk away from it, what have I just earned for myself? And we see that around us. We sense it. Every day we have to deal with it and confront it. And this story over here wants to tell us, well, that's all it is. Drink and be merry. I don't know what else is going to happen. But this story over here says maybe there's something to be done about it. And Paul wants to tell us there's something to be done about it. Because his book to the Romans was not just like, you all suck. It was, but then there was light. Jesus arrived. And Jesus came with an offer, an invitation to join his kingdom and to return the spark of life, to be remade, to be refashioned back into the image of your Creator, to once again reflect his image, and to regain the glory of our original making once again. He comes to us and he says, look, there are two options here. You can walk away and find your own light and live that way in that kingdom, which is all about death and destruction. The thief over there comes to steal, kill, and just destroy you. But I have come to give you life. And not just give you life, I have come to give you life to the fullest. Beaming radiance of life overflowing. That's what I have come to give you. Could you pop that verse on the screen for me? Just look at this verse. I have come to give you life. Give it to the fullest. What an offer. We've been dehumanized by our own choices. We've lost the life that comes from reflecting and soaking in our Creator. But Jesus comes and says, I want to give it back to you. I want to restore it. And this thing that we can say nothing else about other than that's pretty good news. We translate that word gospel. This gospel is sometimes minimized and made very small and like, oh, this message is about how if you die, you'll go to the right place. What? No, that's part of it. This message is that you can once again live life the way you were intended to live it. This message is you don't have to stay broken for eternity. This message is starting today. He is offering you life. He's offering you the ability to stand back in the light and soak it and reflect it in all that you do and say. That this broken state is not our only way to exist. It's not just the minimal requirements to an afterlife. It is bursting forth life here and now. The glorious redemption of humanity in all of God's creation, because when we reflect his image, it reflects it across the world. And it shines light into the darkest places. And this is what Jesus comes offering us, a chance to be remade, to be the true humans we're created to be. The founder of existentialism, which I know you're all familiar with, Søren Kierkegaard, talks about this idea. And this is what, you're like, what's existentialism? Go back and listen to Pete's message today. He says this, and now, Lord, with your help, I shall become myself. Listen, this isn't a self-help thing. He's saying, no, you are going to reflect on me, and then I'll be what I was always supposed to be. The only way I'll ever be what I'm supposed to be is if I get back and stand in your light. With your help, I shall actually become what I was always meant to be. There is hope here. Hope, not just for after I die, hope for after you walk out the door and live the rest of your life today and tomorrow. So how does it happen? How can we accept this life he's offering and live as the true image bearers of God? I think Paul answers this in his own way, and then more specifically, when he says, they chose to worship created things rather than the Creator. Well, listen, we become, again, like what we choose to focus our lives on, what we give our time and attention to, what we glorify. When we worship ourselves and our own egos, our own desires, power, money, all that stuff, surprise, we look like broken selves. But when you worship God, it changes. When you worship dust, you look like dust. There it is. When you worship dust, you look like dust. Brokenness, ruin, rebellion, selfishness. We've had enough of that. But there's another option. Because when we turn our focus back, when we choose to step back into his light, and let our lives revolve around him, we begin to once again look like him. When you worship dust, you look like dust. But when you worship the Creator, you start to look like the Creator. When you worship him, you begin to reflect him. Now, let me pause here, because so I just have to sing a bunch of Hillsong choruses? No. That's a bit of a hijacking of a word that we've not done you any favors with. The word worship does not mean sing in church, okay? Worthship means I'm showing worth and value towards. But the original Greek word, it speaks, especially among Jewish people, was a lifestyle. It was everything that I do is he is God and I'm not. And Paul will basically end his whole argument in Romans with this idea. Look, we've walked out of the light. It's ruined us. We've earned death, but Jesus came and calls us back in, and there's hope. And he says then in his sort of pinnacle moment in chapter 12 of the same letter, he says this, therefore, given all this, I urge you, please hear this in view of his mercy, in view of the fact that he's inviting you back, he's inviting you to come and be remade. Offer your bodies, offer yourselves as living sacrifices. Yeah, the Jewish people, their way of worship was to kill a goat and say, God, I'm sorry, restore. Kill your own pride, your own ego. Put your own self on the cross. This is your true or appropriate act of worship. I love that word there because you can't escape it. Act. It is your appropriate or true act of worship. It is a literal response. It is a thing. It is a do this. Your act of worship, your response should be offer yourselves as living sacrifices. And here's the reality of this. Those are fancy, good-sounding religious words. Let me use the word that this really means. To worship God is to obey God. You can't separate the two. They don't make sense apart from each other. Your true and proper act of worship is, God, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Everything I say and do, I choose to obey Jesus. Notice the things that Jesus said. If you had a chance, I'd encourage you to go read it. Jesus was like, hey guys, here's what I want from you. Just hear me and believe that I existed and we're all good. Nowhere. Nope. He said, I don't care if you hear me. I want you to do what I tell you. The wise man isn't the one who listens, it's the one that goes and does it. If you love me, you will obey me. Die to yourself. Carry your cross. Empty. Put yourself at the end of the line. Give up your life and come and find me. Why would he say all this? Because his words are life to us. Through obedience, we find the life he's calling us to. And listen, the thing is, what's good about context and seeing this in the bigger picture is we want to be like, oh, he's always trying to run my life, tell me what to do. When he says, die to yourself, you have to understand what he's saying. He's saying, you're already dead. You've already left the light of life. You're already corrupted and broken. Why keep living that life? What has it gotten you? I know some people are like, oh, I don't want to die to myself. You're miserable. You're on antidepressants. Why are you holding on to this life so strongly? Let it go and die to it and follow Jesus. He's offering you a better life. He said it this way. He said, what I'm offering you is like a guy who worked in a field, but it wasn't, he's like a slave or something. He's just digging in someone else's yard, and he finds a treasure buried in the ground. And his thought was this. He runs home and sells everything he owns to buy the field so he can get the treasure. And Jesus is saying, everything you own, everything you have is worth less than what I'm offering. So die to it, lay it down. All the choices that you have, your personal freedom, I want to do what I want, it's all led to nothing good. So stop doing it and obey me instead. And you'll find life, because what you're living now hasn't led to life anyway. Stop, it's worthless. Come and follow me. And this isn't, if you really think about it, it's not rocket science. It's like reflecting God's image means I am being and reflecting who God is, right? His nature, his character. It means I look like him in my actions, in the way that I treat people, in the way that I respond. Obedience means doing those things which make me actually do things that God would do anyway. I'm called to show mercy because God shows mercy. I'm called to seek justice because God is just. I am called to love each and every one of you because God is love. And when I obey, I'm doing what I was always made to do. I'm living the life I was created for. Well, how do we know what that looks like? Well, here's the great news. You want to know what it looks like for a human being to be completely and fully human, in complete and utter obedience to God? We have a picture. His name was Jesus. Jesus, fully human, right? Completely obedient to the Father. Radiating God's glory to the world. And then he says something crazy. Come and follow me. Do what I do. Live like I'm living. Stop hurting each other. Start loving each other, right? And so you have these people in the first century who others were looking at, like, look at those weirdos. They're all trying to mimic and be exactly like their Christ. Little Christians. That's what the word means. People trying to be like Jesus. Why? Because if I'm like Jesus, I'm human. I am doing what I was created for. I am reflecting the image of God every time I choose obedience. Every time I look at Jesus and say, that's what a human should do, I'm doing that, I am reflecting God to the world. And you know what, guys? My life is better for it. Your marriages are better for it. Your family's better for it. Your work is better for it. Your personal, physical, mental health is better for it. I'm not saying that's the reason we obey God, but it's true. He loves you and has good things for you. He knows you're a lifeless piece of rock floating through space. He could have left you that way. He didn't want to. He said, no, come here. Let me shine all my glorious light on you and let me make you amazing. And you're like, nah. Come back. Every disobedient act we make is dehumanizing ourselves. It's stepping outside of his light and life. Could this be why Paul says that all creation is waiting and groaning for us, the sons of God, to be revealed? Because we were made as image bearers to reflect him to the entire world. And instead we're like, no, I'm going to keep it all to myself. And the whole world is plunged into darkness. And now we're being called out of that to shine his light, to be his ambassadors, pleading with people, come back, be reconciled with God, shine his light, and it'll all be better for us. And he says this happens when we worship, when we obey. Like, oh, well, I believe in Jesus. So what? So do demons. do what he asks you to do. Don't be a believer, be a doer. Like he's calling you to a different life, and it requires you to say, yes, I will stand in your light, and I will live like Jesus as much as I can through the power of your Spirit. Could this be why so few of our friends and neighbors have any interest in the gospel? Because it's just words and hollow ideas. We want to convince them, you should believe this is true. Rather than living the life has called you to the point that God is rating after you. What is that? I want that. When he permeates and shines so brightly off of us, that only happens when we choose to focus our entire lives on him, to worship and obey. And we start to see all these amazing things happen in our lives. Paul talks about them. He calls them the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, righteousness, faithfulness. And like, those things are God's attributes reflecting off of us, healing us and healing the world. Now, I know that's heavy. Like, oh, babe, well, I don't know what to tell you. Do you want life or not? Do you want to be wise in your own eyes and foolish in reality? Or say, God, if you created everything, I'm just going to trust you. It starts with our decision to say, I'm worshiping you. Now, as we close, I do think, too, part of this, I said I feel like we kind of hijacked the word worship. I actually do want the band to come up, and I do want to sing a song together. Not because singing a song makes me holy or makes me who I'm supposed to be. Obeying Jesus is what I'm supposed to be. But here's the deal. I think there's something powerful about us vocally worshiping Jesus. There's something about our decision to put ourselves in the light, to put ourselves in his presence, to turn our minds and our hearts on him, to spend time just thinking about who he is. He is the source of light and life. He brings hope and healing in Jesus' name. Like he is these things. Let's gather together and let's just sing to him. Let's worship him. Not because singing is like, you will sing to me, but it's just our way of getting near him, of putting ourselves in his light. And hopefully it's more than just like, well, that was a good service. Well done, Pete. Band, good job. Let's go home. It's, man, he's amazing. How can I follow him and obey him this afternoon and tonight and tomorrow morning when I wake up and go to work? Let our times of singing and talking about the Bible, let this actually motivate us and stir us to obedience so we can be the people we're created to be, not just be the people who talk about church, because that's worthless. It does nothing. No one's ever been like, my life was changed because you told me about church. Like your life is changed because you felt and experienced the glory of God emanating off your dead self. That's what changes us.